how to use our digital SAT and linear ACT score report. I am Kevin Organichek, Chief Learning Officer at TPAPT, joined by Rachel Mead, who is our Associate Director of Tutor Training and also the CEO and co-founder of Enhanced Test Prep. Rachel, it's good to have you here. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining us. So our score report it's pretty stellar. There are some other good ones out there, but in terms of the user experience, this is very close to Blue Book. And in terms of analytics, it's perhaps top one or two out there. So take us through how to use the score report. What are the tutors seeing and what should they be considering when they look at our report?
So the first thing that we see here in this score history is the overall view of the composite scores that this particular student has hit. We can see that the blue portion is their correct, and you can click on that if you want to take a look at all of those correct questions. You can also slide your cursor up and hit the red portion that does show the questions that they answered incorrectly. Down at the bottom, I can see which test version they took. I can see the date that they took that particular test. And then also in that blue arrow, we have the opportunity to download the full set of reports for that particular exam. And that's definitely something that I recommend doing, as that individual score report gives us some great information that we can use to customize our lesson planning with our one-on-one tutoring students.
Terrific. So you talked about customizing your lesson planning. Talk about a little more about the foundational use of these types of score reports. These are basically gap analysis reports that great tutoring companies use in different ways, but largely in two or three of the same ways. So what are the foundational pieces that you focus on?
So with enhanced prep, we believe that there's three components that are needed to help a student maximize their test score. And the first one is content, right? They have to know their math formulas. They have to know how to use their punctuation within English. But we take a look at just those pieces outside of necessarily the complexity of what an SAT or an ACT question would do. So when we see multiple missed questions within a particular category, that's normally giving us an indication that there's some content gaps that we need to come back and look at. And Kevin, one of the things that we've really found is when we're looking at the current class of juniors in particular, it's really important to also think about what classes they were in during the time of COVID, because we've seen more substantial content gaps and skill gaps come out of COVID than we really have within the shorter term history of education as a whole. So have some discussions with your student on that. But I bet you're going to find that the score report lines up with giving you a lot of that information. So
That's
again, that foundational piece is content. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, that's no problem. That's really useful information about the pandemic learning loss and how it may apply here, how you can infer some important things. So sorry to cut you off. I was just blown
All
away.
good. Yep. The second piece is strategies, and we discuss strategies in terms of how can we help a student work through a question faster without sacrificing any accuracy. We know, for example, sometimes there's times in math where you don't need to answer the question all the way. You can use the answer choices as a quick estimate, or you can find your common denominator, and then that's going to eliminate quite a few answer choices for you. So what do we see in terms of the use of the student's time that we want to work on as we're addressing this? And then game plan is all about what should this student be doing, right? We know your average student is going to start the test at question 1 and finish at question, 60 or whatever it might happen to be, but that doesn't mean that that's the best plan. When we're looking at the new DSAT, for example, we know the reading questions tend to be a little bit more time consuming and they happen up front. But the writing questions for most students tend to go a little bit faster and they happen at the end. So, what should we be doing about taking a look at the individual student's strengths to say, here's where I want you to start your test so that you get some good traction, you're getting some good confidence, you're getting through a lot of questions without a big consumption of time so that you're feeling better about what you're going to be tackling within the rest of the section. And then the other thing that I think is really important when we're looking at these is it's not just a matter of exposure to test questions. Absolutely, that is something that's going to help the student. But when I'm taking a look at, this particular setup here, I see three tests that happened very quickly at that front portion, two scores that were pretty darn similar, one that fell off there in the middle, right? We definitely want to have a conversation with that student about what they did differently with that 512 test date. Did they forget to eat breakfast? Did they not use their break time or did they not use snack time within it and have some high protein snacks to help feed their brain? Did they take it later in the day or did they take it after they got done studying for something else or after lacrosse practice? Something happened that caused this substantial gap, and it's important that we address that with the students. But we also want to make sure that we're doing some error analysis within this. We can see those other two scores coming in a little bit later here, and those are very similar as well. But for this particular student, if they were getting ready for an official practice test, I'd want to be talking to them about their confidence because it's been a while since they've hit their highest score. It was their first one. So we need to come back and dial in and see how they're feeling about this and making sure that one, they're not burnt out, and two, they're still feeling empowered with regards to what their capabilities are.
Terrific. So if we drill down into any one of these
Mhm.
full tests, we will see something that looks like this, and this is the section score area. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I like to use the section score area when I'm talking with a student and when I'm talking with the parents after when we're reviewing a practice test together, to really make sure that we're setting out our correct timeline in terms of is this student going after super scores? When I look at this spread between the verbal and the math, this is an ideal situation to really recommend that that student is going after a super score approach. We can see that their math score is exceptional. They only missed one question in both math module 1 and math module 2. I can see that. Yep, you've got that red dot with that one coming after it. I can also see here when I'm looking at that math module 2 with the H in parentheses, that's telling me they hit their harder math section. And again, students need to answer approximately 75% of the questions correct within module 1 in order to hit the harder module 2. If they did happen to hit the easier module, we'd be seeing an E there where that H is instead. But
Uh,
the student is fully ready to go in and blow their math portions out of the water. This also tells me that endurance isn't an issue for a student, for this student, because we know their math modules come up second or later in the test. So they're not falling off in terms of their ability to focus or their ability to complete things in time. And really, my job with this student is to come back and work on those verbal components. We can see a total of 4 questions missed within the math module 1 and 3 questions missed within the math module 2 hard. Again, that H coming into play. Now, it's important to make sure that you understand the spread or the distribution of questions between the various modules. Module 1 tends to be very broad and shallow with regards to the questions that it asks. And that doesn't matter if that's verbal or math, but it tends to hit a lot more categories with a fewer number of questions within each of those categories. Math Module 2 Easy and Math Module 2 Hard focus on different types of questions to a stronger degree, and they don't focus on the same type. So it's really important that you're understanding that distribution and where your student is so you know what questions are going to be most important for your student in order to help maximize the score of where they currently are right now.
got it. All right. Well, that takes us into the question analysis and par time, which is it's definitely new and it help to really improve. the gap analysis reports that we're able to create. So talk about that.
This part-time is a game changer in terms of what it's able to do with your analysis on how your students are doing. So over here on the left-hand side of our question analysis, it's giving us our overall main category. So I can see that SEC is standing for our standard English conventions, and that's getting into my grammar questions. After that, we have a little smaller print breakdown of the question category. So I can see question 16, the student did a verbs question. Question 18 was also a verbs question based upon that VS. The blue bar in both of those tells me that the student answered those questions correct, and it takes me to the amount of time that the student used to do those. Now, what's really interesting here with these is that par time. And that part-time shows me the average amount of time used for that particular question for a group of students that had a very similar score as what this student did. So I can see how they're comparing not just to a testing group as a whole, but to their direct peers in terms of maximizing that score. So in this particular case, when I'm looking at question 17, I can see, yes, my student did answer 17 punctuation question correct, but they took a lot of time doing so. And then when I'm looking at 18, that's also a punctuation question, they missed that question and used a lot of time to do that. So this is really coming back and telling me my student does not need any help with verbs. Not only were the questions correct, but they were correct and they were correct quickly. My student does, however, need some work on punctuation. And that could be from a content perspective, where maybe there's some rules we want to come back and take a look at. But it's definitely from a strategy and a confidence perspective, where maybe they're second guessing an answer. Maybe they flagged a question and needed to come back and look at it again. Maybe they weren't quite sure what they were doing and it just took more time. If I'm going to help this student maximize their score, I need to help them get through questions accurately and quickly. So this is definitely coming into an area of what I need to be focused on with my student. Again, we can see the two questions coming up there at the end, 26 and 27, were also an exceptional use of time, one being right, one being wrong. But this is going to help me customize my lesson planning with my student when I can see where they're using their time.
So the print is very small for me, but 26 and 27 would be these two.
Correct.
So here they used a lot of extra time and got it wrong. And here they used just a little bit of extra time, but got it right. But in either case, they're using a lot of time on these question types.
Yes. And that's telling me that they're not quite sure how to address the question. Because again, when I'm seeing that compared to other students that got a comparable score to their 690, they're using more time than average. So we want to help them gain more confidence and security in terms of how quickly they're answering those questions.
And one of the nice features that we have here is this sort by box. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this sort by box is very helpful because it can allow you to break down your big reading categories, which again is your craft and structure or your expression, I'm sorry, your information and ideas. So that's the C and S or the I and I. I can click those if I want to look at all of my reading categories or either category separately. I can also do my writing categories, which is my standard English conventions and my expression of ideas, or I can fine tune even further into individual question types as I'm looking at that. So, like we looked at this student before, I would definitely dial into my punctuation questions and take a look at how they're doing with both their accuracy and their use of time on that. So, I can sort this by the questions that the student answered the fastest, the questions that the student took the most time on, the questions that the student missed or an individual category. So I'm really able to customize what view or multiple views are going to be most helpful to allow me to customize my lesson plans for this student.
Such a far cry from the days of hand scoring and creating your own Excel sheet to score the test for you. It's something.
And even with that, we would never know how much time a particular question
Right.
you took, so it would all be about what did they get right.
Yeah, that's a big deal. The time element is super helpful for tutoring. Okay, that brings us to the question review now. This tab is available to both the student and the tutor, so they could theoretically go over this in this view together and often do. But tell us how you use this.
Yeah, so some of this depends upon the type of student that you have, right? When you have an exceptional high scoring student, they're probably taking the initiative and looking at the questions that they missed themselves ahead of time. And maybe they're putting together a list that they want to go over with you in session. But regardless, I'm always taking a look at the questions that my student took a lot of time to get through or the questions that they did miss. And I want to take a look at any of those particular tendencies. Maybe I'm looking at this question to see if they're falling for a particular type of trap answer. Maybe they're falling for not catching the extreme language or the negative connotation or the opinion based words. Maybe they're not catching active voice or they're not catching concise as part of this. So I'm making some notes as I'm going through and saying, what did the student answer? Do I understand what trap or what mistake they might have made within their computation to choose that answer? And then I'm making sure that the student can walk through the question in front of me in terms of what strategy are we using? What are your clue words that you're finding? What work are you showing? What's your process of elimination within your answer choices here? And making sure they understand why the correct answer is better than the one that they chose, because again, when we're looking at that answer review up there, we can see when they did answer a question wrong, what their individual response was. And if you hit that blue box that says check the answer when you're in there, it's going to show up with a red X on the answer that the student did choose if they did answer this question incorrect.
Yeah, sorry, my highlighter was a little off target there. And then the last thing, the aggregate reports, which are, terrific if for our enterprise partners and schools to use to assess, cohorts of students. Tell us a little bit about, maybe the report you use the most.
So I love the top four on the right hand side, which is the reports by question category, because that's what's really allowing me to come back into my small group course or my large group course and take a look at the potential for my use of time. What should I be working on and why in terms of what's going to have the biggest impact on this group of students? If we have any of our partners also out there, Kevin, that have tutors that work for them, this can be something helpful to do as kind of a tutor check in as well. Are your tutors having students that tend to miss questions in a particular category more so than others? And is there some additional training that you can provide them as part of that? Or maybe they're just not quite as comfortable with a category or a question themselves as well. So I want to share, Kevin, just one other page that I really spend a lot of time and all of our tutors spend time on when we're taking a look at lesson planning for our students. And this is page 3 of the full length practice test score report. And with this, I'm able to take a look at, again, those overall category analysis. Right now, I'm looking at my verbal section. So, again, what we can see here is it's starting off with my craft and structure. So, it's grouping all three of these categories into one group for me. And I can see how the student is doing overall with regards to their use of time and accuracy. And then from there, it's breaking down those three subcategories for me. So my vocab, my function, purpose, structure, and compare and contrast. So I can see overall in my craft and structure, my student only missed one question. and it happened to be in the compare and contrast category. But overall, their use of time with this reading category is pretty darn solid, definitely more so within that vocabulary component. So it's helping me say, okay, within this reading portion, what do I want to add to my lesson plans? Right now, the only thing really showing up for me is that compare and contrast. Check, done. Let's move that over. Then we move over to our information and ideas, our second reading category. I can see there was a total of 17 questions here. I can see the one red circle coming up right here, and I can see where that's falling into play. So that's coming over here into my charts graphs table where the student did miss one question. Now, their time was a little bit over with regards to their information and ideas, and I want to pay attention into where that came from. And that came from detail questions, which is a little bit surprising because those tend to be slightly faster questions. So it could have been maybe some of the new categories, such as poetry or the letters or the plays that could have been throwing them off. But potentially, I want to keep these details on my lesson planning because even though the student did answer all three of these questions correct, they did take a lot of time to go ahead and do that. So I want to help increase their confidence or give them some strategies that they can get through these questions faster in. I would also keep, again, because this student really didn't miss that many questions, I'm also going to keep my figures on my lesson planning as well. Now, it's also important to point out that while they did only miss one question here, we can see that it can carry over to multiple categories. So while this one question that they did miss was a charts and graphs category, it did come into play in terms of arguments and how to support a claim. So it gives me that really fine-tuned piece of detail that it's not just pull data from the graphic, but it's can you identify the argument and what piece of data can we find that would support, strengthen, or weaken that claim as we were looking at it? So I know specifically what types of questions to come back and continue to practice with that student. I can also see when I'm looking at this that their support a claim questions were time consuming. So I want to make sure that I'm using more of those within what I'm working on as well too, that it doesn't just have to be within a graphics, but I want to make sure that I'm doing it within standard reading as well. Drawing a conclusion was absolutely exceptional. So much time left over from that, which allowed them to go over in the few places that they did need to. I'm now going to move into my writing questions, and I start with my standard English conventions. These are your grammar based questions. And we can see that the student needed extra time in order to be able to complete these questions. It wasn't within their punctuation, but it was within their verbs. Their one pronoun question, they did spend right on time with. And then their sentence structure was also just a little bit below. So, again, this is telling me yes, while punctuations were tested 7 times, the student did exceptional with those. Their foundation is very solid. Let's come back and let's freshen up those verbs, make sure that they are dealing with those smoothly and confidently and as quickly as possible. And then that's moving me into my final writing category that's expression of ideas. And I'm taking a look at my transitions here as well as the Prosephi, which is about the note-taking portion questions. The student was researching a topic. Here's the notes that they took. How can they present this topic to an audience that is not familiar with this author or with this book? So we can see that the student struggled a little bit more with those. Again, these tend to be a little bit more time consuming questions, but this is another category that's brand new to this test. So it could just mean that we need to do a little bit more exposure. But I love this view because I never would have known before that I needed to spend some time on details within my reading or verbs within my writing and language with the student before without being able to analyze their use of time, Kevin.
Yeah, the time component is huge. I think it's a difference maker for a lot of tutors because it really helps all of us focus more attention on not just what's right and wrong, but how much time it takes us to get it right or wrong. So absolutely. What else? Anything else?
I would just again come back and say, right, again, we know that College Board does have a few digital practice tests available on its website, but the analytical tools that we're able to get from our practice test provider are so worth the investment in terms of what I'm able to do to dial into a particular student that there's just absolutely no comparison with having them take a College Board practice test and just seeing some scores or knowing a question or two that they missed that we should come back and go over. So I highly recommend using tools such as this or something else similar that provides you the additional insight.
All right. Well, Rachel, thanks for explaining how to use these score reports. This was terrific.